It has been one of the more consequential off-year election nights in recent memory, as our correspondents have been showing you across the country. Let's go in depth right now with Princeton University political scientist Dr. Lauren Wright. Thank you for joining us tonight, Lauren.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, first up for you, let's start with the race that was clearly the most important to Democrats, the governor's race in Virginia. Former Governor Terry McAuliffe against Republican and first-time candidate Glenn Youngkin. What do you make of what's happened there?
Well, it's actually good that it's probably going to be a close race, or at least the polls are very close, because we can make a few assessments right now. A barely won or a barely lost race for Democrats and Republicans isn't particularly meaningful in and of itself, but they can start to think now, why was this so close? What does this mean about our strategy? And for Democrats, even if they pull off a slight win this evening, of course, McAuliffe has very high name recognition, and Virginia has been trending more Democratic in recent decades, they still should not make the assumption that everyone loves the Biden agenda, things are going fine, and we're going to be okay in 22 and 2024. That is not true, and they should pay attention to very likely Republican gains in any case.
Now to New Jersey. Incumbent Governor Phil Murphy trying to become the first Democrat to win re-election there in more than 40 years. Does his race with Republican Jack Ciattarelli give us any glimpse to the midterms next year?
I'm not so sure. You know, we don't need these gubernatorial races to tell us that Democrats are in tremendous trouble heading into 2022. That's usually what happens with the incumbent president's party. They lose about 25 House seats on average. And the question is not really, will they lose Congress? It's sort of how much will they lose Congress by? But New Jersey is a little different than Virginia. We have about 1 million more registered Democrats here. So that's a much steeper hill for Republicans to climb. But in any case, you know, just like the 2020 presidential election, when Trump made significant gains with black voters, we need to pay attention to these crosstabs and these groups that might be surging, even if the party doesn't win. That's what I would urge both parties to pay attention to.
Yeah. Interesting point you do remind us of there. Well, we always want to talk about a monumental night in Minneapolis, where both the reform of the police department and the city power structure are on the ballot. What will the final results there mean to the city and potentially elsewhere?
Well, that's a tough one. Usually local elections, you know, as we often tell our students in the university, they are absolutely the most important for people's day-to-day lives, but people pay the least attention to these races. Even less than a statewide race, less than a presidential midterm or a congressional race, certainly less than a presidential election, but it's really lopsided as far as how much it matters. And so I think in these cities, what all Democratic candidates are having to do is this tightrope walk where they're saying, yes, absolutely, we care about rising crime. We care that people feel safe in their neighborhoods, but we need to accomplish these goals with police reform. And Minneapolis is the center of that in the country.
Well, we've had mayoral elections in several American cities today: Boston, New York, and Atlanta, major cities. What's your take on what you've seen in each of these?
Well, you know, I'm so hesitant to make extrapolations based on one race to another race in the future. It's probably better just to stick, you know, within mayoral races and maybe think about the future of mayoral races. But in all of these elections, what we're seeing is really high voter enthusiasm. And what that means is high turnout and people paying attention perhaps to races that they haven't in the past. And one tremendous trend that a former colleague of mine at UPenn, Dan Hopkins, write a lot about is that these races, even at the local level, are becoming nationalized. And so even local issues like school board issues, where we would have never thought we would have these debates at the local level, they're all being talked about in terms of national politics. And so it's no wonder that we're all trying to make sense of these races at many different levels of government all at once.
And finally, President Biden has not technically been on the ballot today, but in some places, maybe he was. What are we seeing tonight about the president and even the former president as Donald Trump's influence still looms large in the Republican Party?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm looking particularly to Virginia because both candidates have attacked their party's leader nationally, whether it's Donald Trump for the Republicans or Joe Biden for the Democrats. And, it's sort of unfortunate because Virginia has so many local issues that really matter. Rising healthcare costs, expansion of Medicaid, they have a budget deficit. They have a lot of local issues that really matter, but they're talking about national political debates. And so, again, if Republicans pull off an upset win in Virginia, it would be a mistake to say, oh, no one cares about Donald Trump. I guess that's over. I guess he's the best standard bearer, because really, in a lot of ways, Youngkin has run for more or less a standard Republican political campaign with issues like school choice, parental choice, taxes. Those have been Republican issues for a very long time. So it would be a mistake for Republicans to make an assumption about Trumpism looking toward the future just from this individual race.
We appreciate your insight so much, Dr. Lauren Wright at Princeton. Thank you.
Thank you.